Hey, thanks for tuning in. We wanted to take a few minutes as a staff and have a conversation about the topic of racism. Now, this is a really important issue in our world today, and there are other issues that come out of this issue, some social, some political, but we wanted to specifically talk about racism and how we can help be a solution as God's people in the midst of a difficult topic like this. So thanks for watching. So Trav, you grew up here in Holmes County, but you also lived in Chicago for a little while. Can you talk about just some of the differences of your experiences when it comes to race and what you saw in those places?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in Chicago, I worked primarily with high school age African-American youth. And I remember one time we were playing basketball, which was a common occurrence for us. And one of the young men was leaving, and he maybe got 50 feet from the building that we were playing in, and we had all kind of dispersed, and the cops had picked him up. There was no real reason for them to pick him up, but they did. And as he was handcuffed in the back seat of the car, he was able to grab his cell phone and call me. And he says, "Hey, I need your help. You've got to come get me. Here's what happened. They picked me up. I didn't do anything. And so I grabbed Don. We went to the police precinct where he was being taken, asked for him by name, and they said, "There is no one here by that name. We do not know what you're talking about, who you're talking about. We do not have him." And so for a day, 24 hours, we couldn't hear from him. We didn't know where he was or what had happened. And then finally he calls us and he said, "Hey, they had me in the back, they stripped me down, they ran me over, they couldn't pin anything on me, so eventually they had to let me go." Wow. So that's just one story of where you see just the impact of the struggle of growing up as an African-American young man and just the perception and the racism that sometimes they experience.
Yeah. What about here in this area, in Holmes County? What have you seen? What have you experienced?
Yeah, one of the unique experiences was that off the wall, we went to buy a van one time, and Todd, our operations director, steps out of the car, meets with the sales rep, points out a van that he would like to drive, and he's like, "Hey, I'll grab the keys and you can go take it for a test drive." Don steps out of the car as he comes back, and he says, "Oh, I think I'll ride with you." And it's just very subtle, right? And he might not even meant to, quote unquote, be a person who's really racist, but that kind of perception and idea of a black person steps out of the car, I think I'm gonna ride along now.
Right.
And those are just little things besides the jokes and maybe seeing someone on the side of the street and you're getting a little fearful, or women clutching their purses a little tighter when they see an African-American person. Those are just little ways that I think it invades kind of our area and our suburbs.
Right. So Don, systemic racism, that's a term that we've heard in the recent months and years. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, it simply means when there are laws and policies that are really there to oppress a people or to be racist towards a people. So let's say Black Americans have been in the country for 400 years. We came over under slavery. And then we had Jim Crow laws, they're devastating laws. If you don't know about them, you should go read about them. Yeah. And then you have segregation, and then you have housing policies, and then you have cohabitation policy, and they were all targeted towards Black Americans to keep them from advancing. Yeah. And that's really what systemic racism is. It's when there is racist policies or practices to keep a group of people because of race below another group of people. Okay. So that's what it means.
So how do we still see the effects of that in our society today?
So what happens when you've been under that kind of racism and the policies and the laws for that long, it creates an inequality. So if you go to inner city America and the schools, they're not good. You know, I worked in Chicago and people are graduating high school with a 5th grade reading level. I mean, you can't compete in America with that kind of reading level. And then there's programs like welfare. But if you're on welfare, they want to keep you on welfare. And if you want to advance, if you want to go get a job, they pull the welfare from you. But as a single mom, you can't afford to raise kids then. So these type of things are happening today. And so even for me personally, you know, I've seen racism and I've seen what it does to people who've lived under it so long. It creates a hopelessness. Yeah. And people said, well, they're just lazy and they don't care. That's not true. They have been conditioned to be hopeless. It's almost like when you get so hopeless, you don't even care if you live or die anymore. There's no motivation to try to advance yourself because you know it's not going to happen. Right. So that's how I've seen it played out today. So these are real things.
So Marlon, when we turn on the news or social media, we see a lot of different opinions, statements being made about things that have happened recently in terms of race and racism. But I think as believers, as God's people, there are things we can all agree that are wrong. What are some of those things?
Yeah. One, we can agree that what happened to George Floyd was wrong. He was murdered. And the people that did that need to be held responsible. Second, we can agree that George was an image bearer, that his life was precious and valuable because he was created in God's image.
Yeah.
And we can also agree that it's wrong to judge people based on the color of their skin.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of 1 John. John writes, "How can you say you love God whom you have not seen if you don't love your brother who you can see?" And then a fourth thing that we know with absolute certainty is that there are going to be people of every race in heaven. Every tribe and language and people and nation are going to be in heaven. So I just those four things we know with certainty.
Amen. So Jeff, there are some hot button phrases that we hear a lot at the time. Black lives matter, all lives matter. How would we respond to those as believers?
I think it's important to understand what people mean when they say those things. I think also those phrases are associated with movements, and I think we have to be careful to judge entire movements based on a few people's actions. In every group of people, there's going to be outliers and people who do things that we don't agree with. We have to try to understand what the movement is all about. I think Black Lives Matter is pretty straightforward. It's like I have two sons, Rain and Cyrus, and if I walk up to them and Rain is just pummeling Cyrus, I say, "Rain, stop, Cyrus matters. You can't just beat him up." That doesn't mean that I don't love Rain. It doesn't mean that he isn't important. It just means in that moment, I've got to defend Cy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Black Lives Matter is really saying. In this moment, we need to defend Black people because they're being judged and persecuted unfairly.
Yeah.
And so we as a people need to stand up for them right now. Yeah. I think all lives matter is the response. You see a lot of that as response to that. And on the surface, I totally agree. All lives matter is absolutely true. We are made in the image of God, and it's important that every life is important to God. But I think it can simply be used as a cop-out. We don't really want to deal with racism. We don't think it's real. And so we just say all lives matter. And that's just our blanket way of saying we're not going to deal with racism. We don't think it's happening anymore. It's in the history books. And I don't think that's true, but we can have that conversation. But let's not just shut down the conversation with a simple phrase that says all lives matter.
Yeah. What about another one, white privilege? How do we respond when we hear that phrase?
That's one that people get really worked up about. And I think, again, this is a pretty straightforward idea. If you do some research, you'll find that the average white person in America has an average net worth 10 times larger than the average Black person. And that is not because Black people don't work as hard as white people. That's a crazy idea. So we've just got to admit that there's a basic inequality here, that me as a white person, I have privileges and opportunities that minorities don't have. You know, white people are 75% of America, and the rest is split up between other minorities. Mm-hmm. And when you're the majority, things are built for youth, that you automatically have opportunities that other people don't have. And that's just the way it is right now. Yeah. But I think we have a responsibility as people who are in the majority, who have that privilege, to change that, to make it so that this is a country and we have communities that are fair for everyone, that give everyone the same opportunities, that if you work hard, you can make it just like anybody else. And I don't think that's true right now. We have a responsibility to fix that.
Yeah. So Don, I think we'd love to know just how have you, as an African-American man, been affected by racism growing up over the course of your life?
Yeah. So I have two stories that jump out. I remember when I was around 6, 7, 8 years old, and I had a best friend. His name was Raymond Pandeli. And so his mom invited me one summer day to go swimming with them to a public pool called Packard Park. And I thought that'd be cool. I hadn't really swam, but I thought it'd be cool. But I remember her going in the house, and I heard her call the park and said, hey, I'm bringing an African-American young boy. Is it okay if he swims with whites? And I didn't think anything of it, but I went home and asked my mom, I said, why did she do that? And then she explained to me really what was happening. And I've never forgotten that. Wow. But the most devastating time, I remember I went to Youngstown State before Moody to go for criminal justice corrections. I was working as a probation officer at a juvenile justice center in Mahoney County. And so one day we took some kids up to see a Cleveland Indians game, me and another probation officer, and we were coming home, we were hungry, and I saw McDonald's, and we pulled in, and we get in, and we're ordering food, and the security guard come and say, you're getting that to go, right? I said, no, I think we're just gonna stay and eat. He said, you should get it to go. And I said, no. He said some words I don't wanna say, but then in 30 seconds, I was down on my face on the ground with him on top of me, putting handcuffs on me. I was arrested, thrown into prison. So I called my boss, and she called the judge of Mahoney County, who called someone. And about 2 hours later, they came and said, you can go. No, I'm sorry or anything. I remember walking out, and I remember the discussion with Rob afterward. He said, how are you gonna explain what happened to those 5 young men? I said, I honestly don't know. So that kind of impact is devastating. I tell you, those stories, and we remember a lot of good stories, but those aren't good stories, and I still think about it. And I still think about what those 5 young men who I was trying to teach how to love Christ, be an African-American man, and honor all people, what they thought. And I lost track of them, but I still think of them today. Yeah. So those are stories that are impactful.
So we don't want to just stop with words. We want to try to help be a solution. How as the church, as God's people, can we do that done?
I think, well, in the culture we're in right now, so let's talk about the protests. Honestly, if you feel called to that, you should be able to do that, but peacefully. Yeah. And you should never, once they cross that line, you have to disassociate yourself from that. But there is a call to peaceful protest, and I think that's very important. I also think, if you really feel God's calling you to something, find a cause that's worthy. Yeah. Study, be educated, and say, this is a worthy cause, and I'm gonna support it, I'm gonna get behind it, and everything like that. And I also think, honestly, we have to stop injustice. So when we see it, or we hear racist jokes, or we hear these little things that we say, oh, they're not big, that's why we're here right now, because no one stopped the little things, and now they're big things. So when I'm with my friends, even if they say something off color, I have to say, hey, that's offensive. And I don't want to, it's my realm of influence. I'm talking to people that God has me with day in and day out. If I hear these things, I have to speak up, and I can do that in love, and I can do that with kindness, and I can do that honoring Jesus Christ, but I have to say something, because your silence is complicit. You're complicit in the problem when you remain silent, when you see it right in front of your face. Yeah. And then lastly, I think we just have to rise above. Yeah. We are disciples of Jesus Christ, ambassadors of Jesus Christ, and we have to rise above. So I don't have an allegiance to being African American. I have allegiance to my King, the Lord Jesus Christ. So I am going to treat people with dignity and respect. And when I see that woman crossing the street or clutching her purse, I'm going to make sure she knows. I'm going to smile at her, and I'm going to represent Christ as well as possible in that moment. And I think that's how we're going to start to bring answers to a lot of this.
So we at the branch will continue to take a stance against racism. And this conversation was just the beginning of many conversations we need to have as a people, as a church, about how to be God's people in the midst of a topic like this, an issue that affects many people in our country. Thank you guys for watching. We love you so much.